For almost 3 years now, I've been using a BenQ SW271C 27-inch 4K monitor for all of my photo and video editing work. But now in 2023, there's a new model. This is the new BenQ SW272U. Similar size, similar specifications, but with this model, all of the hardware has been redesigned, the software has been updated, and BenQ also addressed, I was rather pleased to see, a number of the cons and negatives that I shared about my experience with the 271C. Before we go any further in this review though, I do need to let you know that BenQ did provide me with this 272U for the purposes of creating this review. That said, BenQ is not paid for this video. They have not sponsored this video. I don't have any relationship with BenQ, so they've had no editorial input in this video, and they are seeing it at the exact same time you are. So my job here in this video is not to sell you on a monitor or promote a monitor. My hope here is to give you enough real-world information and some of my own subjective opinions about it to help you make a more informed decision if you are currently shopping for a new display for your photo editing work. So the 272U is part of BenQ's PhotoVue line of monitors. Now this is a line of specialty displays that BenQ has designed especially for photographers, which they make abundantly clear on the box. 272U is a 27-inch monitor, and that's 27 inches from corner to corner. 27 inches for me is just right because it's not too small, but it's not too large either. It just feels right. To me, it's just more comfortable. So I really like the 27-inch size. The screen is 4K with a native resolution of 3840 by 2160, and 4K has more pixels per inch than a 2K or HD display. So when you use a 4K display to edit your raw images, you will see more details and textures in your images when you are using this display. The bezels around the outside are much, much thinner. This is a big improvement over the previous model. And in a weird way, the display almost looks bigger than it did before, like to me now, even though it's the exact same size, even though it is still 27 inches, the thinner bezels just, I don't know, it's like a trick of the eye or something. Like it just seems to make the display seem bigger than it did before. The 272U uses a backlit IPS LCD panel, with IPS standing for in-plane switching. IPS is simply older technology than newer tech like micro LED and OLED. And some people like micro LED and OLED on their desktops because it's good for gaming, it's good for entertainment, it makes the displays look more like televisions. And, then they produce deeper, inkier blacks, which is also nice. But for photo editing, IPS is actually better because IPS is more color accurate and because IPS provides better viewing angles. So like right now, I'm looking at the screen at an angle and the photo looks perfectly normal. It looks, pretty much the same as it would if I were sitting directly in front of the screen. Maximum brightness is 400 nits, which is fine. It's good, but in a way that number really doesn't matter, because when you are editing photos, you should never edit your images at maximum brightness anyway, because when you do, well, your eyes are fooled into thinking that the image is brighter than it actually is, and then print that image or do something with it later and the image looks really dark because you edited the image on a bright display. And when you calibrate the display, you turn the brightness way down anyway. I guess part of the reason for promoting the number 400 nits is because 400 is the minimum threshold for HDR. But those who really care about HDR, they're probably going to want a display that's brighter than 400 nits anyways. So again, the number doesn't really matter. Bit depth is 10-bit, which means the 272U can display just over 1 billion colors, which is about 64 times the number of colors that are displayed by cheaper 8-bit displays, in case you're curious to know. Like most other 10-bit displays that you see on the market, this is an 8-bit display with frame rate control. Frame rate control being some hardware tech that's inside of the display that dithers and blends colors in order to produce hues that live outside the range of 8-bit in order to produce that 1 billion color range of 10-bit. So it's not true 10-bit, but it effectively emulates 10-bit. And this is true for most other 10-bit displays that you'll find out there. The front panel on the 272U has a new matte finish that is similar to the matte finish on the 271C, but does a much better job of minimizing reflections and glare. Thankfully, the base has been redesigned. This was one of my cons about the 271C because that display had a base that was rather thick and kind of rounded on top. It had like this convex shape, which was rather awkward. You couldn't put like anything on top of it. Well, now the base is flat, so you can, stack stuff on top of here. It's much more usable. BenQ also added this like faux leather strip to the front of the base here. So, you have like a nice place to put your SD cards and other items and keep them in place, which I think was a good idea in principle, but unfortunately the implementation is not that great because the material that they used here is practically plastic. I mean, it's basically like plastic with just some texture on it. So, nothing grips, it's not sticky at all, and stuff, slides all over the place. So good idea in theory, but I wish that they had, used a different, like stickier, more organic material here. The stem in the back is height adjustable. You can raise and lower it like so. You can do it one-handed, no tools required. It has just the right amount of friction so that when you pull it up or drop it down and let it go, it stays exactly where you left it. The display also rotates 90 degrees like so, and when you turn it into a portrait orientation, there's like a little catch in the back here so you know when it's perfectly level. And by the way, if you don't want to use the base, you don't have to. Like the previous model, the 271C, the display is VESA compatible, so you can use it with a monitor arm if you choose to. In the box with the 272U, BenQ also provides a plastic hood with black velvet on the inside that helps block glare and ambient light. The hood provides an opening for screen calibrators so you don't have to remove it when calibrating your display, and the hood can also be adapted for portrait orientation as well. Also included is BenQ's iconic HotKey Puck, which now, thankfully, is wireless. It's finally wireless. This was one of my complaints about the 271C because this is the one from that monitor, and it was just kind of awkward having this cable dangling down, and wasn't a big fan of that. But now, thankfully, it is wireless, and they've changed the design of it a little bit. There's also 3 different channels that you can select back here if you're trying to control different monitors. And they've also added a convenient info button to the front here that when you press it, you get this nice little pop-up here on the display that shows you which color space you're currently using. I think this is great because sometimes I'll step away from my computer and I'll come back and I'll pick up work doing something else, and I won't remember like whether I'm currently in Adobe RGB or Rec 709 or what I'm currently using. The one thing that I don't like about the new HotKey Puck is the fact that it is powered using 2 disposable AAA batteries. They could have designed this with an internal rechargeable lithium battery and like a USB-C port or something like that. It would have been nice for this to have been rechargeable. So 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Also new with the hardware, BenQ moved the 2 USB-A ports and the SD card slot that were here on the side of the 271C. They moved them down here to the front of the display, and they also moved the rather awkward headphone jack from the back to the front as well. So everything is now down here on the front, which is more convenient, and it helps clean up the side of the display as well. Having an SD card slot in the display is nice, especially if you don't already have one that is convenient on your desktop. But if you do, like I do with the MacBook Pro and my Mac Studio over there have SD card slots, this one is rather slow. The read-write speed is about half of what I get with the other ones, so it's not a slot that I intend to use. But if you don't have access to one, it may be a nice feature. I have it connected right now to a MacBook Pro over here using the provided USB-C cable. And that single cable provides both the video signal from the laptop, and it also provides 90 watts of power downstream to keep the laptop charged and to provide it with power. You can also connect it using HDMI. There are 2 HDMI 2.0 ports here on the back and a display port as well, if you would prefer to connect the display that way. Speaking of the back, BenQ did clean up the back of it a little bit, made it look a little bit nicer, a little more attractive, which will be good if you're like in an open office kind of a situation. They added a loop to the back of the stand back here, so you have a place to loop your cables together. And they also included a plastic cover for this space back here where all the cords go in, all the ports are, because that is it's just not the most attractive thing in the world. So it's nice having a little plastic cover just to cover it up, and it does look nicer. Now, as mentioned earlier, the 272U and other PhotoVue monitors from BenQ, they all support multiple color gamut standards in the hardware. And this is kind of like owning multiple displays inside of one display, because you can change the color gamut that the display is using, unlike most displays which only have a single color gamut, with that color gamut usually being like sRGB or P3. It's usually one of the two. But this display here and other PhotoVue displays, they support P3, Adobe RGB, Rec 709, sRGB, and there's also some pretty unique custom modes in here, including MBook, which mimics the look of a MacBook Pro screen. I never really use that, but that's interesting. And there's also a monochrome mode, which I actually do use. I like that because then you can turn that on and then say like browse your Lightroom catalog and look for color images that might work well as black and white. The display also supports something called Gamut Duo mode, and I'll go ahead and turn it on here for you. And this is a mode where you're able to see two different color gamuts on screen at the same time. So this over here is sRGB, and this over here is Adobe RGB, which is a larger color space. I can look at this image over here and get an accurate preview of how this image here that I'm editing is going to appear on a cheaper, more conventional sRGB display when it is exported and converted to sRGB and all that good stuff. The thing is, I never really use Gamut Duo, and part of the reason why I don't is because it's rather small, you know, because you can't enlarge these previews here. There's like all this dead space up here. I wish I could just, you know, like punch in or something, but this is what you get. And for me, I don't know, for me, it's never been particularly helpful, but that is a mode that's there if you want to experiment with it. Now, in addition to the built-in color gamuts that I mentioned earlier, including Adobe RGB, sRGB, Rec 709, DCI P3, Display P3, and so on, in this list, you will also find Calibration 1, 2, and 3. These are calibrated color modes where you can calibrate the display targeting any of the aforementioned color gamuts, and then that calibration data is stored within the hardware of the display as a 16-bit lookup table, a LUT in other words. Now, something to know is that when you do buy a calibrator, or if you already own one, you don't use the calibration software that is provided with the calibrator. Instead, you use BenQ's Palette Master Ultimate software, which is a free download for macOS and Windows. I calibrated the 272U here with the SpiderX and BenQ's Palette Master Ultimate, and I calibrated different modes for calibration 1, 2, and 3. And then I assigned calibration 1, 2, and 3 to the 1, 2, and 3 buttons on the HotKey Puck here. If I press, 1 on the HotKey Puck, it automatically switches to this is Adobe RGB, and this is, set up for photo editing, like if I'm editing an image in Lightroom. Number 2, I have set up for soft proofing, and you may notice it turned like a little more yellow, like the white balance shifted a little bit. And the reason for that is because this is using a different white point. This is using the D50 white point instead of D65, which does a better job of emulating the color temperature of paper. So this is like a quick, little soft proofing mode that I can turn on if I want to. And then number 3 here on the Puck, when I switch into that, this is the Rec 709 mode. This is what I use for video editing in Premiere and DaVinci. If you don't edit video, if you just edit photos, another option for you could be setting up number 3 for black and white. I think that's a really helpful mode, but again, you can set it up however you want. Now, this all may sound rather complicated, but I promise you it's really not. It was actually quite easy for me to set up because the Palette Master Ultimate software has built-in presets for the different photo editing modes, the video editing modes. So all you have to do is just, select a preset and drop the calibrator in front of the screen, and that's pretty much it. Whenever you change from one calibrated setting to another, it automatically switches the ICC profile to the appropriate one in the operating system without you having to do anything else, which is fantastic. I'm so glad to see that they developed that and they made that change, because it really does, for me, make a big difference in the user experience of their product. I calibrated this display multiple times using the SpiderX Pro here, and every time the average delta E value was always less than 1. Delta E quantifies the perceivable difference between two colors. The lower the number, the better. So when you are shopping for a color accurate display, you want a delta E value that is equal to or less than 2. 2 is the magic number, because when delta E is under 2, it means that the average person cannot tell the difference between an actual color and that color that is being rendered on screen. There is no perceivable difference between the two. And when that delta E value is under 1, well, that's even better. That means that even the most highly skilled professional people wouldn't be able to tell the difference either. So what all this translates into, what it all boils down to, is that the colors that you see on screen are actual and are as, as real and as authentic as they can possibly be, which means that you can trust that what you're seeing on screen is authentic and true when you are editing your images. Okay, before closing out this review, there is one additional application I need to mention, and that is Paper Color Sync. Now, this is also a free utility available for macOS and Windows from BenQ that you can download. And basically what it does is simulate what an image will look like when printed on paper without actually printing the image, without wasting paper and ink. You open an image as a JPEG or a TIFF in Paper Color Sync. You choose which printer you're printing to and also the paper type. And when you do that, the software changes the display to simulate the white point, the color temperature, the black point of the paper you're printing to, so that you can more accurately preview and see what that image is going to look like, and then make changes and modifications thereafter if you choose to do so. Now, all of that sounds great in theory. The problem, though, is that Paper Color Sync supports only a specific range of printers and only a specific range of paper types. As a matter of fact, it's rather limited. And unfortunately, the printer that I use, which is a Canon Pro 300, at the time of this video at least, is not supported by Paper Color Sync. So I wasn't able to even use it. Now, back when I reviewed the 271C, I owned a Canon Pro 10, and I did test Paper Color Sync with it. And the results were fine. They were good. But I wouldn't necessarily say they were any better than, using soft proofing modes in Lightroom and Photoshop and, downloading ICC profiles from the paper manufacturing companies. If you know how to do what I just described, I think you're perfectly fine using that, and you don't really need to use Paper Color Sync. I think Paper Color Sync is good for people who, aren't as well versed in the crazy world of of making prints, and they just want to get an accurate preview of what their image is going to look like before they hit print and send it over to their printer and start wasting, paper and ink. When I reviewed the software like almost 3 years ago, it was a little rough around the edges. It was rather clunky looking. It didn't, look particularly great in macOS, and unfortunately, it still doesn't. It still looks pretty. Yeah, it's a little rough. I feel like BenQ, needs to commit to it, and they need to, improve it and make it better. Add more printers, make it more useful. If they are going to be, marketing it and making it, one of the reasons and one of the features of the display, one of the reasons to buy it. I feel like the software should be better. Okay, so when you add everything up and you average, everything together, the good and the bad, the pros and the cons, and focus on what truly matters. Is this a good display for photo editing? I think the 272U is a fantastic display. And that's partially because I was already a fan of the 271C. It's been rock solid for me for, almost 3 years now. It's still, performing great. I've always had good results using it. And I think the 272U is just as good, but better because it improves upon the design. It has better features. The new software is better. I like the wireless HotKey Puck. Don't like the batteries, but that's okay. And the new matte finish is fantastic, and I think it looks great. The main con, I think, of the 272U is the same con of the 271C, and that is price. At the time of this video, the 272 retails in the United States for $1,600, which is pricey for a 27-inch 4K display that, well, quite frankly, doesn't include a webcam. It doesn't have speakers, and is primarily made out of plastic. It's not exactly the most premium hardware. I think it kind of depends on you, and I think it kind of depends on how much photo editing work you truly do. Because if you're more of a casual photographer, if you are someone who occasionally edits images, you primarily post and view your images online, social media, and you don't really make prints, and you care about color accuracy, but you're not weird about it, and you just want a display that's good enough. There are so many good displays out there now. You can find plenty of, decent 27-inch 4K displays with acceptable, reasonably good color accuracy that, will perform perfectly fine for you. If you do care a lot about color accuracy, you make prints, all that good stuff, but you don't necessarily want to burn a hole in your wallet and spend $1,600, well, there is another option available to you, and that is the BenQ 272Q. That is a sibling display to this one, also 27 inches, very similar color accuracy, very similar specifications. It's just that that display is not 4K. It is lower resolution, which means that fine details, and it's not going to be as sharp. The pixels aren't going to be as well defined on that display as the 4K model, but it does cost half as much. Personally, I think 4K is worth the extra money, especially because I shoot with a Fuji GFX 100S. So I like detail. I spend a lot of time looking at images, and I want to see as much detail and texture as possible. That's important to me. Now, another display I want to mention, because I know some of you are probably considering it. If you are a Mac user and you are shopping for a new 27-inch display, you may be thinking about Apple's 5K 27-inch Apple Studio display. I don't own one, but I know from years of experience that I've owned a bunch of Apple displays over the years, and they always make fantastic displays. I mean, very high quality displays, no question about it. And the Studio display does have some advantages. I mean, it is 5K, it has more pixels per inch. The macOS interface does a better job with scaling, of course. The Retina interface works better because it's made by Apple. If I were spending my own money and choosing between the two, I would purchase the 272U. The Apple Studio display is not hardware color calibrated, unlike the BenQ, which is. It only supports a single color space, that being display P3. It does not support all the different color modes that you get on this display. But worst of all, in my opinion, you have to pay an extra $700 in order to get the Studio display with a matte finish and a height adjustable stand, which makes the 5K 27-inch Apple Studio display more expensive, a good deal more expensive than the BenQ. So when you put everything in the proper context, I think $1,600 makes sense. It is expensive, don't get me wrong. I mean, you could certainly spend less and get a good quality 4K 27-inch display from elsewhere, from a different brand. But when you add up everything, all the different features, the capabilities, the build quality, the user experience of the display, if you're serious about photo editing and processing, if it's something you do a lot like I do, I think it's worth the money. And I think it's a very good investment to make, not only in yourself, but in your own photography as well. I'm obviously a fan, because I've been using the BenQ 271C for almost 3 years before this one, and it's been great. And this one is just as good, but even better because of the new features and because of the new things I talked about. And I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate your time. Thanks so much. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. You can find my email address in the video description down below, and you can also leave a comment if you want to. Oh, and give this video a thumbs up if it was helpful. I would appreciate it. If you want to do this again and hang out in the future, remember to subscribe as well. That is it, everyone. I'll see you next time.